Now, on to our first speaker, whom all of you know because he's been here leading us all week. Early next year, Jim Bonham will begin his 8th year leading our great association of ESOP companies, professionals, and employee owners. And while Jim can, at times, be a forceful, if not plainly spoken and direct leader who we've all come to admire and respect, Jim's effectiveness at his job and as an advocate and protector of ESOPs is unrivaled. Since Jim became president and CEO in early 2019, the association has grown stronger, more visible, and more influential than ever. The value of an ESOP association membership has grown exponentially under his leadership. It is quite difficult to list all of the major accomplishments, but here's a few. Our membership is at an all-time high by nearly 1,000 new members since he took over. We've added chapters. Our conferences and events are larger, offering more and better sessions. And we are leading the way in ESOP education with more than 10,000 annual attendees at our local, regional, and national events. Our budget has nearly tripled, and our impact is clear. The ESOP Association is on the cusp of finally securing clear regulations on how our trustees can safely value shares, the adequate consideration regulations, and reversing decades of abusive regulatory treatment by EBSA. This is something that was pie in the sky 6 years ago, but today is rapidly becoming a reality. The Employee Ownership Foundation has grown by more than 500%. We now have the Darden Executive Education programs at the #1 public business school in the world. There's the Oxford Symposium on Employee Ownership, the top international gathering of EO stakeholders, and it's helping catalyze a wave of new nations adopting ownership models. And we're not just invited to the table in DC when ESOP policy is discussed, we're helping to shape the conversation and write the legislation. We've created the Public Policy Council that provides a direct voice into the policies that the association both supports and opposes. And we roll up our sleeves and work side by side with our champions in Congress to get the job done. You've heard Jim say that the ESOP Association punches above our weight. Well, that's not just a slogan, it's true. And you'd be hard-pressed to name another trade association in any industry with the track record we've achieved since Jim got to the association. But we can't stop there. We have to stay vigilant, we have to stay strong, and we have to keep evolving. We have to anticipate the challenges and seize the opportunities to serve you better. Jim is here just to share what's ahead for the association and our movement. So please join me in welcoming our president and CEO, Jim Bonham.
Thank you, Derek, for saying those nice things, but you and I both know that the association's accomplishments have always been the result of the efforts of the whole team, starting with the hundreds of volunteer leaders who commit their time, their effort, their expertise to our community. Our chapter leaders, our committee members, our national officers, who are both passionate and generous beyond belief with your time and your commitment. And the professional staff of the association who put in the long hours, the hard work, and endure all the stress that comes along to make things happen. Now, I don't have a huge amount of time this morning before we bring on Michael Easter, who I know you all would prefer to listen to this morning than me. So I'm going to try to keep my comments focused within two main topics this morning, advocacy and education. Now, education is one of the biggest areas of service that we provide. Whatever we survey our members, when we look at levels of engagement, and when we talk with our ESOP leaders, the opportunity to learn and master the broad range of topics related to running an ESOP clearly emerges as one of the most important reasons that people join the ESOP Association. And while we have made substantial changes and improvements to the delivery of ESOP education over the last several years, we have even more transformational changes on the way. Now, for the last 30 years or so, The general approach towards ESOP education has largely been unchanged in its major structure. Articles and books, conferences and meetings with concurrent sessions led by professional practitioners with expertise in often complex or challenging subjects. Maybe throw in an occasional webinar, a workshop, or a lunch and learn. They get mixed in. Maybe even a golf outing with a round table at the 19th hole. Those ones I always find a little questionable, but. Now, I'm not knocking it. Our chapter meetings and our national conferences are outstanding. The hundreds of professional members, the experts in the field, readily share their knowledge with all of you so that you can be better at what you do. But here's the problem. How do you know if anyone is actually learning and retaining the information? How do you know if the key information has been received and that there are not gaps in the knowledge? And how do you know that the information you're receiving is actually the most current and that others have reviewed it and agree, all right, that's correct? And from a company leadership perspective, how can our ESOP leaders know that the investments they are making in professional development for their employees is leading somewhere purposefully, and that it will have meaningful value to the company's success? And in an age of emerging artificial intelligence, how can you know that what's being presented and consumed by your employees is based on reality and not some AI hallucination? So now in almost every industry, there's a certifying authority, everything from welding to plumbing to doctors and IT professionals. And the ESOP Association has always taken great pride in the fact that presentations made at our conferences have been tested for accuracy and peer-reviewed by our professional advisory committees. In order to be a presenter, our professional members must fulfill certain responsibilities and participate on those advisory committees. Each committee is chaired by a person selected by their peers, and each of those 6 chairs, along with the chair of chairs, work to design and select the content and materials to be presented at our national conferences, which, of course, then flow through all of our chapter conferences and meetings. Now, those presentations must be prepared and submitted in advance. They are reviewed by their peers, sometimes even by their competitors, and ultimately approved. But as thorough as that process is, and it is the gold standard for ESOP education, there is still a lot missing. Curriculum matters. The progression from basic to complex matters. The manner in which information is conveyed matters. Key vocabulary and concepts matter and serve as building blocks to future topics necessary to achieve a mastery of a full subject. And a demonstration of retention and facility with the material should ultimately be the goal. Now, we've been wrestling with this for the last few years and building toward an approach to learning and professional development. Now, you probably have not pieced it all together, but we've been testing different approaches for some time. Using our new programs like the Employee Owner Accelerator, which is an immersive day-long program designed for newer or mid-level employee owners. We've been experimenting with interactive roundtable formats, combining keynote speakers with follow-up executive roundtable topics to watch the interaction between the subject matter of the keynotes, the presenters, and the key audiences for the material. And I'll tell you, sometimes it works great, but other times it's like crickets in the room, and it's a total flop. Now, creating role-specific events for executive education, like our CEO and CFO summits, creating pre-conference sessions, like our ESOP talks for young professionals at the annual Professionals Forum, these are all examples of where we've been testing. And of course, change is not always just about adding things. It is also sometimes about making the difficult choices to end or transition legacy programs. Programs like our former CEO program with great people like Ginny Vanderslice from Praxis and her relationships at UPenn, in order to form a new partnership with the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business that would be more sustainable and expandable. Now, decisions like these allow us to move forward and grow into a more complex and robust programs that improve the service we can provide for all of you. Today, we have both a CEO and a CFO executive education program at Darden, and they're absolutely fantastic. I mean, these are truly world-class courses now. Our first cohort of CFOs have graduated. Several of them are here, and they are amazing people. Our CEOs will be finishing up a month from now. And the word is spreading so quickly that we're actually getting requests from some international leaders to come here and attend because they don't and won't have anything that comes anywhere close to it. Now, as part of that program, we are also rapidly building up a library of ESOP-specific case studies, where our top leaders can learn from the successes and, yes, failures of their predecessors by studying real-world examples and real challenges that they, too, are likely to face as ESOP executives. And a very gratifying byproduct of that is that the cases will begin being taught outside of our own programs and in the mainstream MBA and business classes to Darden students starting next spring. I mean, how cool is that? Literally the top business leaders of tomorrow finally being taught about ESOPs in their MBA classes. So this morning, I am most pleased to now officially announce that the ESOP Association will begin offering certification programs based on a professionally designed curriculum, peer-reviewed content, and the most current adult learning methodologies starting in 2026. Now, our first task will be to work closely with our professional advisors to adapt presentations and materials. We're formatting them to ensure the presentations of all key concepts are engaging, have more interactive activities, and follow a pedagogical approach that allows for stackable micro-credentials that flow from one to another. Now, as part of this new effort, we will also be tackling many of the most common denominator problems all of your companies seem to be facing. For example, we've identified a massive need for onboarding assistance and education about ESOP-specific topics. As part of our technological solution that we have been building, and as part of your membership, you will gain access to a whole library of materials, presentations, and onboarding programs, all available online. You will even be able to work with our team to set up your own company-branded portal through which your administrator can then select library of content modules and even add or maybe even develop your own and place them in there as well. And that's the portal that your employees will gain access through. We're also working with Darden, based on their offer to us, to find ways to give you all access to their executive education and lifelong learning content and materials. Now, also in the works will be an AI-assisted content development tool that we expect will be able to help develop avatar-based video, audio, and visual presentations specific to your company, but populated with trusted and verified content. Now, that may take a hot minute to get completely right, but it's definitely coming. Now, this is a transition that's not going to happen overnight, and we expect it to roll out over the next 2 years, but I am very excited to share with you today the vision we have for the future and the direction we are headed with our education programs. Too much coffee this morning. All right, now I'm going to shift gears. And I'd like to start by sharing a little story. You know, many of you may know that one of my personal passions is the sport of sailing. And I grew up in Wyoming, so this is definitely something I came to later in life. And earlier this fall, I had the privilege of spending a few days with my oldest daughter and her new husband, bringing their sailboat from Rhode Island down to Annapolis. And now when it comes to sailing, comedian Dave Barry once wrote that the first step is to decide where you want to go and to point the boat in a different direction. And if you understand the physics of sailing and wind, that's funny. Well, to make the passage, the wind direction was going to cause us to go pretty far offshore into the Atlantic Ocean, and then cut back west until we hit the coast in Delaware Bay. We expected it to take us about 3 days, maybe 72 hours. And what that meant was that we had 3 overnight shifts that we would all take turns at the helm. So on the second night, everywhere we were hammering into the wind, about 150 miles due south of Block Island. Waves were up to about 10 feet. Wind was at about 18 knots, gusting to about 22, and it's around 2 a.m., and I'm strapped in on deck by myself, steering the boat while the others are sleeping. It was my turn. Then all of a sudden, all the electronics, the GPS, the radar, they all go dark. Bloop, nothing. Well, crap. It was honestly not the biggest deal, because we just needed to keep going south, and then at the right moment, hang a right and go west until we hit the coast. But how do you know when you're still heading south, when it's the middle of the night, and there's nothing around you for hundreds of miles? Right now, as hokey as it sounds, there it was, right behind me, North Star. And I was able to line it up from where I was seated at the wheel, and so long as I kept it roughly in the same position, I knew where I was going. Now, why do I share this story? All of us as individuals, and all of your businesses, have a North Star. That one singular point of reference in the darkness that doesn't change and can guide you no matter what else is happening, no matter how confusing the conditions may become. It gives you a bearing, and you know what to do. Our North Star at the ESOP Association is you, the employee owners working at ESOP companies. Full stop. Everything we do, every conference, every session, every service, every policy we pursue is in service to you and for the advancement of ESOP employee owners and the companies you own. Now, we do not take this responsibility lightly, and when it comes to the ESOP space, we are hyper-vigilant. As I have worked to lead this organization for the last 7 years, there have been many times when that North Star idea has had real gravity, as our volunteer leaders, our committees, the board, and I have been steering our course. Well, folks, we are at another moment when our North Star is becoming necessary, and we must remain in focus. You know, we had an election yesterday, and at the core of the dissatisfaction and the turbulence, the anger boiling under the surface in our country today, lies a tension between everyday average Americans trying to get by versus the perception, if not reality, of a system rigged against them. Employee ownership, and ESOPs specifically, are increasingly standing out as a beacon in that storm. Politically, socially, economically, we have all the good things that Americans are hungry for. Now, that is not lost on powerful people and powerful interests. It makes us into something very attractive as a vehicle to advance their agendas. Now, while we would like to be able to take credit for all of the increased interest and activity around ESOPs and employee ownership, the reality is the moment is lifting us in many ways that are outside of our control right now. And unfortunately, there's one area where our leadership and our membership of ESOP companies should not be so excited about, and that is the sudden and high-profile interest of private equity firms into the ESOP space. Now, I'm going to get into that in much more detail in a moment. But before I do, I want to highlight the raft of successes that we are having in Washington these days. And you've heard me say before that for far too long, the ESOP community has been sort of crouched in a defensive posture, concerned that the tax structure for S corporation ESOPs was at risk. Now, that whatever the next tax bill may come along, we might have to put all of our resources into making sure that S corporation businesses did not suffer a setback. And I'm not questioning those decisions or those worries, but that is not where we are today. There is not a single member of Congress who credibly wants to scale back the federal investment or incentivization for ESOPs as we know them. Nobody, not one in either political party. And if you doubt that, as evidence, all I need to do is point to the fact that in the last 2 months, we have passed multiple bills through the Senate, and also in a deeply partisan House committee on unanimous recorded votes. The person who was nominated to be our single most important and consequential regulator at the beginning of his confirmation hearing said that once confirmed to his position at the Department of Labor, he would end the war on ESOPs on day one. He was quoting directly from our campaign in support of his nomination. Now, this is because we have worked hard to go on offense, to bring our biggest obstacles and impediments to the front and to try to tackle them, rather than being crouched in that defensive posture. Now, before the end of this year, we expect to pass and have on the President's desk statutory language to establish a transparent process by which shares in ESOP companies should be valued. A process that our trustees can rely upon in good faith and our employee owners can trust will be fair to them as well. From there, we expect to engage in a notice and comment rulemaking to further flesh out the regulatory details of the process. And finally, we will engage in sub-regulatory dialogue to ensure that all of the finer details are fully described. And our goal is to finally move our community past this issue of DOL and plaintiff bar litigation and abuse. It's a frustration that is an undeniable impediment to the future growth of employee ownership. And it's a major driver of expense escalation in forming and running an ESOP. Now, we are also poised to pass major reforms on what we internally call the 1,000 paper cut issues, the death by 1,000 paper cut issues. The comparatively small but collectively consequential issues that have been mounting for decades. Issues like the 404, 415 limitations, having voice and representation on federal advisory councils and committees, loan and licensing issues at SBA or at state agencies that impede growth or could otherwise maybe smooth operations for ESOPs. Now, our agenda is full, and we are limited only by the financial resources to pursue everything all at once. But that brings me back to the one dark cloud on our horizon as we see it. The sudden interest and entry of private equity investment firms into the ESOP space. And I'm going to tell you right now, from the start, this is controversial, especially from the perspective of some of our professional members. For the first time, later today, the ESOP Association is going to publish an important special edition of the ESOP report. It is focused entirely on what we believe is a rapidly growing and very real threat to the future of employee stock ownership plans as we know them today. Private equity firms seeking to amend ERISA create a new legal definition of an ESOP that only they can sponsor, create a new structure of tax benefits only they can receive, and create broad exemptions on valuations and other employee protections that are embedded in ERISA. It is not light reading, but I encourage each of you to read it and become informed about the dangers as we see them. Now, I could not possibly cover in one speech the issues that surface when you start to really dig into this private equity agenda. Now, why would private equity firms suddenly have this interest in ESOPs? If all you see is their public relations campaign, and that's really what it is right now, or hear their name, it is about a newfound appreciation for sharing their investment returns with their employees. But a sober analysis of their public assertions, combined with their privately shared plans that they have given with us, surfaces tremendous problems for the future of existing and not yet formed ESOP companies. A more reasonable explanation than just the goodness of their heart for private equity's motivation into the ESOP space is much more obvious, and it aligns with their history and their purpose, their singular mission of maximizing investor returns. They want big federal tax breaks, improving a tarnished public image that is severely limiting their appeal to sellers, and addressing a crisis they face in retaining and motivating employees at the firms that they acquire. So bluntly, it's about the tax breaks and the improved productivity they hope to achieve in order to generate better returns for their investors. Now, I want to be very clear. Despite being labeled as ESOPs, these plans are not ESOPs and do not carry many of the key characteristics of what it means to be an ESOP. You have to remember they would be brand new and require an entirely new definition under ERISA. They would be parallel to us. They would require an entirely new set of tax incentives. and they would have broad exemptions from some of the core requirements that all of you and your ESOPs must meet. For example, they are intentionally terminal, meaning the goal is to sell and end the plan, usually within a 4 to 6 year window, rather than an actual ESOP, which is intended to have permanence and serve as a retirement asset for the employees and future generations of employees behind them. Another example is that they do not use the future profits of the business to purchase the company for the employees like a real ESOP. Instead, the government is buying the employee equity stake through a dollar-for-dollar tax break for the private equity investors, who are then also retaining the profits as well as all the free cash flow the firm is generating. And finally, they also desire another exemption from ERISA to allow employees to sell back their interests without any kind of a withdrawal penalty from a retirement plan. That alone would redefine ESOPs outside of the norm for qualified retirement plans. Now, why is that important? Because you have to remember, the whole reason ESOPs receive any tax incentives at all is because they are retirement plans, and there is a public interest in retirement security. If that goes away, there's no reason to keep giving the tax breaks. Now, just because something is labeled an ESOP does not make it so. We believe these would be much better labeled as something like a short-term equity plan or a STEP plan, which is what we are starting to call it. And candidly, if they were called anything other than an ESOP, if these private equity firms were not trying to hijack the meaning of ESOP under federal law and make use of all of our history and research and political capital that has been built over decades, we could probably care less about what they wanted because it would not impact us. But they are calling them ESOPs, and that does impact us. Now, over the last year, the ESOP Association studied their stated principles, their privately shared policy proposals, and the effect that they could have on our member companies, the taxpayer, and our future. We consulted with experts in finance and M&A activity. We even asked the budget lab at Yale University to examine the proposal and tell us what it would cost within the federal budget. Our views on this have been carefully considered, and the time has come to start sharing all of this work with you. Our concerns mainly fall into 3 buckets: cost, abuse, and risk. Let's start with the cost. Currently, the Joint Tax Committee, which is sort of the official scorekeeper in the Congress, projects that each current ESOP plan beneficiary represents a cost of about $300 in lost tax revenue for the federal treasury every year. In Yale's modeling, the per plan participant cost for the ESOPs would skyrocket and would more than triple to over $1,000 per plan participant. In the first 10 years of these redefined ESOP plans, the cost would be about $100 billion. In the second 10 years, after the plans get ramped up, these new ESOP plans would add another $550 billion in cost. Now, the effect of that is it would place the overall category of ESOPs well within the top 10 to 15 federal tax expenditures. We'd be right up there with real estate interest deduction. And the vast majority of those tax benefits would be going to private equity investors under the name of ESOPs. Now, supporters of the group that's calling itself Expanding ESOPs will rebut this by saying, oh, no, guys, the plans that this analysis was conducted on, they're no longer under consideration. We've stopped doing that. That they abandoned the ideas and have a new plan that they haven't shared yet with anybody. Unfortunately, the analysis doesn't change because private equity wants a dollar-for-dollar taxpayer subsidy for any equity grant they may give to their employees. So the cost is the cost. The nature of how the specific tax break works is irrelevant. The cost is derived from the value of the equity grant relative to the share of the American economy that private equity is expected to buy in the next 20 years. Now, why does this matter? Because all of our existing tax incentives for real ESOPs particularly the S corporation benefit, would be put in the same bucket as the private equity tax breaks. Our future becomes inextricably linked to their future in any tax bill that might come along down the road. And sooner or later, that next tax bill will come along, and we would have a target on our back the size of Manhattan, and we will no longer enjoy the broad bipartisan appeal that we have been carefully cultivating. Instead, we will be just another tax giveaway to private equity. How many of you think that Bernie Sanders is going to come to our defense then? So what about that second concern, abuse? This is where valuation exemptions and changes to ERISA, they decide in both their specific plans as well as in their stated principles, they cause real problems. They want to have blanket exemptions from valuation requirements, which is a real problem for any employee, our North Star. Now, in our newsletter, we describe 5 obvious ways that exemption could be abused, particularly when combined with penalty-free employee stock buybacks that they also want to include as part of their plans. These abuses range from slow-rolling allocations or slow-rolling vesting of shares to equity stripping and over-leveraging the company, leaving the employees with a bankrupt company even after the investors have managed to walk away with all of the value and made their returns. Now, when you're forming public policy, you must plan for the worst actors, not the best. And while we actually don't think Pete Stavros is authentic, we don't doubt it, that he would like to see more employee ownership. And he himself is not likely to abuse the system. But there are 19,000 other private equity funds out there that could. And if all of these new plans are called ESOPs, every time one of these new plans gets abused and the employees get hurt or the company fails, that becomes defining for us and for our companies. Folks, that's the risk. We currently have near universal bipartisan support in Congress, but that has not always been the case. ESOP abuses in the past led to significant recriminations and consequences in the Congress. Even some of our most trusted and fervent supporters today still carry scar tissue that could get re-agitated with just a handful of abuses that hurt employees. Now, one of the 2 groups that they've formed is called Ownership Works, and they're trying to motivate the private equity industry to include employee equity in their business plans, and they're aspiring to generate $20 billion in wealth in a decade. And honestly, that is terrific. They should have been doing this all along, and we have no issue with that. But let's put that figure in context so we can understand what we're putting at risk. Over the same time period, that 10-year window, private equity firms are expected to generate more than $30 trillion in returns for their investors, against $20 billion for the employees. To provide even more context, your ESOPs currently hold about $1.7 trillion in value and are paying out nearly $165 billion in wealth to employee owners each and every year. Or to put it another way, current ESOPs will pay out more wealth before Christmas than Ownership Works aspires to pay out to employees in a decade. That risk-reward calculation is not in our favor. And that's what's being put at risk. Now, I have no doubt that this speech and the analysis we've conducted over the last year will be met with criticism because, after all, employees getting something is better than nothing, right? You've heard that before. But our North Star, our guiding principles, focus on protecting and perpetuating actual ESOPs, not some approximation that is more about tax breaks for investors than building employee owners and enduring ESOPs. Folks, we don't need a Temu version of ESOPs. There are other ways that we can grow in all sectors of the economy, and we also discuss those in the newsletter that we put out. There's a terrific piece of legislation that's been introduced called AORA that Yale also looked at, And we'll be releasing those results soon as well. But in Yale's conclusion, that piece of legislation over the next 10 years will add more than 6,800 new ESOPs, actual ESOPs, 51% or more ESOPs that have to follow the exact same rules as all of you. Now, for our professionals, you're likely going to be asked, if you haven't already, to lend your endorsement of these plans to help build momentum. And I know that will be tempting because goodness knows private equity can spend and probably does spend a lot more money with a lot of your firms than we ever could. As ESOP companies, you will likely be approached as well to share your story of employee ownership. But understand, your experience and your ESOP is different from what they are selling. So please, before jumping on the cleverly named expanding ESOPs bandwagon, we ask that you educate yourself. You must ask questions. You must require clear answers and detailed plans. Because if you don't, you're risking the entire enterprise. So folks, as always, I thank you for your commitment to the ESOP Association and for listening to me here today. We will continue to keep true to our North Star, which is all of you. Thank you for being.
Jim, thank you for everything you've done for the ESOP Association, for your tireless leadership. I want to add that Jim's views, especially about the risks and dangers of private equity entering the ESOP space, are the shared views of our leaders, our Public Policy Council, and our Board of Directors. This is not something that has gone unconsidered. We understand and appreciate the gravity. And for those of you who are championing these new initiatives, I encourage all of you just to take a step back, consider the implications as well. Being an ESOP has specific requirements that not only protect our employee owners and companies, but they provide the basis for how our companies and our employee owners are treated under the U.S. tax code. We have an obligation to protect our membership and what it means to be an ESOP. If you start eroding that meaning, you undermine the whole system. It is not okay to just create something entirely new and something different and label it as an ESOP in hopes that Congress will grant you special treatment. If private equity firms want to create those short-term equity plans and receive different tax treatment, they should own that and not piggyback on our good name and proven results.